So, what exactly is sex addiction? There's so many myths around it. We're going to talk about it right now. Sex addiction is an unhealthy coping mechanism where sexual stimulation is used like a drug to numb out overwhelming emotions. It is not a characterological or moral disorder. It's an escape when one doesn't know how to manage those tough emotions because no one ever taught them. The seeds for sex addiction are generally sown in childhood, particularly households with abuse, chaos, or even rigid rules, as is the case in a lot of religious homes, where children just aren't allowed to show their negative emotions. So when a child feels lonely, invisible, insignificant, and not good enough, etc., they do whatever they can to try and escape those feelings. With sex addiction, the child discovers how anything sexual can help them escape otherwise inescapable feelings. So even thinking about anything sexual can produce the drug that makes them feel really good. And when this happens repeatedly, the brain rewires itself to create those autopilot responses. And once that's established, that mechanism, it can stay quiet for months, years, even decades until the next time the individual feels similar emotions. And when that happens, the brain just hijacks them automatically to that unhealthy coping mechanism. Now, I'd mentioned that a lot of people have myths around sex addiction, so I just want to break a few myths. Number one is that sex addiction is about quantity, i.e., if someone wants it a lot, they must be an addict. In fact, if someone has a high sex drive and a really healthy way of taking care of it, sex hasn't become a compulsion for them, and they can stop having sex whenever they want, their sex life isn't impacting other areas of their lives, then no, it doesn't classify as sex addiction. Another one that really bothers me is where people think that sex offenders are sex addicts when they're different things. With sex offenders, they are different because they're into paraphilias. They can be sociopathic without remorse, or they can have an antisocial personality. But they don't have that compulsive component which defines addiction. Yet, sadly, many people, they seem to use the two terms synonymously. Another very sad one is that promiscuous people are sex addicts. While sex addicts, of course, can be promiscuous, not all promiscuous people are sex addicts. With many promiscuous people, what has happened is maybe they were sexually abused as children, which made them feel really debased and devalued, and assuming that that's their sole worth. Everything is tied into sex. So when they grew up, they ended up using it as coinage to obtain love, acceptance, popularity, validation, and so on. So, in that particular scenario, most of them are focused on performance, not pleasure, and some of them may not even enjoy sex. Another myth, someone who's cheating is a sex addict. Unless someone is a serial cheater or they have multiple affairs simultaneously, they're not necessarily a sex addict. But it seems to be the biggest area of confusion. Whereas an affair is a choice, sex addiction, like any other addiction, is a compulsion, where a person can't quit even though they want to, which by the very definition talks about addiction. And then there's another one. Sex addiction is about an unquenchable thirst for sex. Sex addiction isn't any more about sex than an eating disorder is about food. What both food and sex have in common is the needs that they can fulfill above and beyond their primary purposes. So try to think of sex as food. An emotional eater will eat when they're stressed out, lonely, unhappy, possibly bored, among other things. And even as they eat their way through their emotions, they know it's not a good way to cope, but they can't help themselves, and they often feel a sense of guilt and self loathing right after indulging. And so it is with someone who uses sex to escape their emotions. Now, the question may be, can sex addiction be treated? Absolutely. But you have to ensure that you work with a professional who's trained in treating sex addiction. Regular therapists, general addiction therapists, and infidelity therapists, they may be great at the other stuff, but they don't generally follow a program that's shown to work. And both parties, the addict as well as their partner, need to do side by side recovery work so they can fully heal and move forward. So if you're sitting out there any of this resonates, or maybe you're a partner who's wondering, who's scared, who's terrified, it's really important to seek out professional help. There is no shame in that. You don't need to struggle anymore. And you need to find out what started this all. Maybe there's a wounding there that needs healing as well. It's the whole process.